Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert, and we're in the studio today, as ever, with ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin. Today, we're looking at the coming threat horizon for 2019. The ISF, the trusted source that senior security professionals and board members turn to for strategic and practical guidance on information security and risk management, has recently announced the organization's outlook for the top global security threats that businesses will face in 2019. Steve, is there a common theme for 2019's threats? What's different about the coming threats compared to previous years?
I think 2019 is really all about a return to basics for me. It's about information security coming back into the real focus, I think, for organizations. And by that, I mean it's all about the data. It's all about focusing down on how do we preserve it, how do we ensure the confidentiality of it, the integrity of it, the availability of it. So some of those traditional information security premises. And that really underpins all of the threats that we're looking at, certainly in 2019.
Can you give us an overview of the areas that you've identified that are going to pose the most significant and pervasive challenges for CIOs and CISOs in the coming year?
There are four that we've come up with this time, Tavia, and the first of those is the increasing sophistication and prevalence of cybercrime, and I include ransomware and spear phishing in that. The second one is around legislation, the impact of it, the effect that it has on organizations, on their ability to really operate effectively, particularly across multiple jurisdictions, and just the sheer time that compliance is going to be taking out of the workday around that. The third one that we've highlighted is around smart devices, and I'm not just talking about things like tablets and phones here. I'm including the Internet of Things in it. So everything that ranges from any device that might be looking for a Wi-Fi signal, looking for a Bluetooth connectivity, to share data, to access data, and the impact of that on not just the organization, but of course on the individual, because as we've talked about before, there isn't really any boundary anymore between the work environment and the personal and home environment. So that one is particularly interesting, I think, for a number of people. And then the final one is around the supply chain. And I'm particularly calling this one the myth of supply chain assurance. It's been something that organizations have been looking at for many years. Some have dealt with it more effectively than others, but if we look at the number of breaches, certainly that we saw in 2018, still a significant proportion of those were coming through third-party providers. And so it's about what is the real threat there and what is it that we can do as organizations to really deal with it and handle it in an appropriate manner. And that may involve us doing things differently.
The top threats that you've identified just now, are they mutually exclusive, do you think? Or is it possible that those threats can combine to create even greater threat profiles?
I think inevitably with these things, they do tend to combine from time to time. So, if we think about supply chain, for instance, a route in to an organization might be through a smart device that is at a third-party provider, for instance. Legislation will have a broad brush impact across all of the different areas that we're touching on. And then cybercrime clearly uses a number of different threat opportunities, if you like, to really take advantage. And so I think the challenge for organizations is that these things very often don't work in isolation. There is a combination of things, and I think that's why it's so very important that we take a particular look, not just at the individual threats, but at the ways in which organizations can combat those. And there are a number of different ways that we can do that.
If a corporation then doesn't want to sustain catastrophic damage inflicted by these threats, what should they be doing differently in the coming year?
I think there are probably four key areas that organizations really need to focus on. Some of them are not new. We've talked about them before, but of course, we all know that these things tend to fall through the cracks. The first is really the basics. It's that cyber hygiene. It's about patching. It's about making sure that your updates really are just that, up to date. And it's about making sure that you have a fairly rigorous program of work that you can monitor, that you can check to ensure that you do have the right level of security across your enterprise. The second really looks at the area of awareness, and I break that into two components. The first I call situational awareness, and the second I relate to people. So it's about making sure that you understand or that you have a mechanism for appreciating the way in which the threat landscape is changing, the way in which threat actors are targeting perhaps organizations not just in your sector but outside, and so therefore may have application in what you're doing. It's also about understanding the way in which regulation and legislation is changing, because that can impact the way in which you go about doing your business in different markets. So that I put into that sort of situational awareness piece. And then the other element of awareness is all around the people. It's about the education. It's about the reinforcement of cybersecurity awareness. And that is fundamental. That really is something that I think we continue to talk about, but is never going to go away. So that's the second area, awareness. The third one is around collaboration. And I touched on this when I was talking about the basics, but collaboration is really fundamental to everything that we do going forward, I think, in security. If we look at cybercriminals, one of the things they're exceptionally good at is collaborating with each other. We're not so good at that. And so I think that in 2019, organizations really need to make an extra effort to share threat information, certainly. And there are a number of organizations that are out there that enable that. So not just the ISF, but there are the FS-ISAC, for instance, there's IC Squared, there's ISACA, a number of different industry bodies that you can go to share information. But collaboration as well across the enterprise. So I think increasing the level of awareness at the business level of the role that security has to play, and increasing the level of awareness at the security level of the way in which they need to approach the business. So I think collaboration is fundamental as well in 2019. And then the final area is really planning for the day that you hope never comes. It's about planning for the breach. It's about running your cybersecurity exercises, your response exercises. It's about making sure that you've got your playbooks down before the event happens. And that involves a whole range of different people across the enterprise. It includes the boardroom. It includes your HR people. It includes your PR people. And of course, it includes your IT and your security people. So those are the four things I think that organizations really need to do better. It's focus on the basics, raise the level of awareness, increase collaboration, and then plan for the breach.
So you're talking about how enterprises can create a resilient business despite the acceleration of the pace and scale of change in this hyper-connected world. Is there anything that you want to add to how enterprises can prepare to respond to these threats?
I think the more that an organization knows about its own capabilities in terms of its security posture, in terms of its risk profile, its risk appetite, the better placed it is to address some of the threats that I've been alluding to here, and indeed the better placed it is to address some of those remedial actions that I was just talking about. So I think there is a need to take a very long and, I suppose, pretty hard look at the way in which an organization is running its security. And that's probably something that we don't do often enough. We operate in a very, very fast-moving environment. Cyberspace is incredibly fast-moving. And so it's probably unrealistic for us to think that we can take a look at putting in place a security strategy, say, at the start of the year, aligning it with the business direction, and then assuming that we can put it away for the next 12 months. Increasingly, it's all about how things are changing in the minute. And so I think that really this re-emphasizes the need for security to be working collaboratively with the business. And I think for all organizations to understand that we do have to get better at improving the way in which every single one of us accesses information, and we need to understand better the importance of some of the practices that we've probably adopted. So security, the need for it certainly isn't going to go away. It is really, I think, embedded or should be embedded across the organization, because everything that organizations do today now is about working in cyber. And so if you're working in cyber, you have to have a consideration for security. Each
of the four areas that you laid out, I think, deserves its own more detailed conversation. You've said that organizations must prepare themselves for unprecedented levels of collaboration, including buy-in and coordination from legal, compliance, audit, HR, IT, information security, and other stakeholders so that the risks can be properly assessed and addressed. So to help our listeners get ready for that coordinated response to each of the four areas of significant threat, I'd like to have you back to delve into each threat in more detail. So let's pick this up soon and start the conversation with detail about the increased sophistication of cybercrime and ransomware, which will give our listeners a better understanding of that threat. Until then, For valuable resources, more important and timely conversations, and tools that will help you safeguard your data privacy, visit securityforum.org. And listeners, we want to hear from you. If there's a guest you'd like us to bring into the studio, a topic you'd like to hear covered, get in touch. You can tweet us at securityforum or send a message through our website. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.